It's v.h.s.x. What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be discussing another forum post today. I think this one is a bit of an interesting one, a bit of a hot take, if you will, I gotta say. Really unexpected, to say the least. And this one is titled Survivor Adepts should require all four to escape. And in the description, the killer has to kill all four survivors. So why can't a survivor get their adept by abandoning their team and or doing nothing all game? And he does bring up a very valid point, but I do think it's a bit of a hot take. I mean, it is quite difficult for, you know, especially if you're in solo queue at least, very difficult to just guarantee an escape. However, I also am in the camp that it is an achievement, and therefore, you know, not every single achievement is going to be easy. So in a sense that escaping already can be pretty hard, getting all four people out, you know, in a sense is making it more challenging. Which in a nutshell, it's like pretty good. You're like, hey, you know, achievements are achievements, you know what I mean? And you know, it's not on paper, it's not as bad, but it kind of I'm kind of stuck in between, because on one hand, I understand the mentality. On the other hand, I think that even trying to achieve it might be very difficult, unless you can actually like have like people teaming up to escape, which is interesting. So somebody says escaping in solo queue is much harder than getting a 4K as a killer, let alone getting 4 escapes in solo queue. This is borderline impossible, and making separate achievement conditions for solo queue and Swift would be weird. I don't really say that escaping in solo queue is much harder than getting a 4K. I think they're both equally difficult. I wouldn't say one is harder than the other. Because they're especially like, you know, if you're brand new to the killer and you don't know how to play them and you're going against competent players, like it's going to be very hard as well. You know, or if you're going against a competent killer and your teammates are bad in solo queue, like I think both ways it's going to be annoying. So like, I think it's fine where it's at if you consider that. But you know, I expect a lot of Survivor players get really dramatic because they like to say like borderline, and like they used to use a lot of language like borderline impossible to do, and it's like you can do it, you just don't think you can. This person, there's not really any point in doing this besides from spitting the random teammates that I presume caused you to make this post, which is another valid point. This person says, not a fan of making adepts even more situational, especially with the unintentional sandbagging they tend to bring. I sooner make it more forgiving for killers to get them than making it harder for survivors, especially since attempts impact other players around you. Which is also a very good point, and that's why I also kind of agreed with the idea of making the adept harder, so that there isn't a situation where people can just kind of throw the game in order to get their achievement. Now, DBD already has had a history of having really impossible achievements. If we even take into account like the console version of DBD, they do have a Huntress trophy or achievement. And specifically on the PlayStation version, you have to land about 1,000 hatchets, I believe, to get it down from about 24 meters and further away. So that's not something that you can consistently just kind of do. And then I think it was actually reduced on other platforms. But for some reason it's like still at 1,000 for the console version. Not really sure why. Or even like the old Evil Incarnate challenge, or achievement or trophy or whatever, whichever you prefer, was very difficult to achieve with the old mechanics of Myers. So it's interesting. But let's continue. So they say, not a fan of making adepts more situational, which, yeah. This person says they'll fit the MO of the game. Very little reward for working as a team, but heavy penalties for not working as one, which is surprisingly we're actually getting a good take from one of these Survivor mains on the actual forums. That's a shock to me. I didn't think I'd see the day. But I think that also applies as just the game as a whole, right? There really isn't any reward for working as a team. and there is no incentive, like there's nothing to incentivize you to do so. Even though it's supposed to be a team game, they make every single Survivor player like a Swiss Army knife that can complete everything, and it's like I don't understand like why that is the case. Like I think they need to make it a little more restrictive so that things can kind of level out a little bit, you know, kind of create like roles and stuff like that, but that's besides the point. So this person says, I disagree. Getting a 4K with only 3 of Killer's perks is very subjective. Responding to the whole solo queue is much harder than getting a 4K as the Killer, which I that's my point as well. I think they're either the same or Killer's harder depending on your experience level with the Killer and who you're up against and that kind of thing. But they say, I disagree with getting a 4K with 3 perks, obviously, because Artist or Clown have good ones, and then we have killers like Wraith, Huntress, which have terrible perks, and most of the killers have bad perks, or they aren't good on that killer. They are from like Dredge's Locker or Reveal perk, more suited for Huntress and Trickster to Dredge, who doesn't trigger it with his power. Which is another good point. I mean, the fact that like a lot of the Adepts don't really give the character that offers them anything usually. Like Darkness Revealed on Dredge, like you're pretty much never opening the locker because you're teleporting into it, so you're not really like opening it, which is a good example, you know what I mean? Or even like Ghostface, like he has a whole bunch of stuff that really doesn't do anything for him in his perks, you know, to name a few, right? They say getting an escape with survivors having only their 3 base kit perks is way easier than getting a 4K with Killer that isn't an A tier, super strong, and has really bad perks, which I do agree with. I think that survivors are less impacted by the perks they bring. In comparison to like most of the roster on Killer, where it's like you kind of need that extra little boost depending on the character you're playing. But if we're just talking specifically S tier, like you could go perkless or have random perks, and you'll have the same similar results. So it's not really that big of a gap in that sense. They say the take on Survivor Adepting requiring all survivors escaping is even wilder than Killer's Adept requirement and should be reduced to 3 kills as merciless victory due to hatch being a thing. 3 kills are considered a victory, which is another interesting point. You know what I mean? That is another interesting point as well. The reason that a Killer Adept is hard is because hatch, so then you kind of have to slug them for the 4K in order to get your Adept in the first place. And then of course that's what makes a lot of these Survivor players crash out. And of course, you know, if behavior is trying to kind of level that out, then they could do that. Now, however, it is an optional achievement, so like I don't think they're really incentivized to do anything about that. It really is not going to affect their bottom line by any means, which is what they're concerned with. So on the other hand, I think that, you know, because they're not going to change that, I think that we're just going to have to work with what we have in that sense. And of course, you're going to have to slug to get that for Survivor to confirm your 4K in order to get your achievement. So let's see. As for survivors, I will leave Adept requirement as it is now because 4 survivors escaping while you run 3 bad perks, not good ones because that particular survivor has met perks, is very bad, especially when the kill rate is set at 60%, which it isn't actually at 60%, but they want it to be at 60%. So that's a little correction I'm going to put in there. So usually 1 or 2 survivors are dying, and this would make those Adepts almost impossible. More like 1 in 100 matches chance to happen. Who would want to grind for that? It's even now challenging. Kinda. Good point. For my personal experience, it's easier to get Survivor Adepts compared to Killers. Kanado Killers are so strong and have good perks, so that they take the 4 survivors with these, like Blycool, Drac, Billy. Higher chance for you as a survivor getting escapes than 4K with Legion on his base kit. But yeah, that's just kind of the big gap between a lot of Killers, unfortunately. Another survivor main giving us an interesting take. They said that it'd make them really hard, obviously, and then it might end up leading to more ratting, which I already don't enjoy to see. The problem with Adept players not doing their part can be solved by needing a pip or 2 instead of or in addition to an escape. This would have to engage with all form of gameplays in a match, which is interesting too. So, and then of course, you know, they also say that like just how like the Killer Adepts are so much fun dominating, being on the cusp of getting a hard one, only to whoop whoop the head spawn and he got away. Which, yeah, I mean, like, that's what I was saying as well. Like, I think that both Adepts are just annoying, no matter how you slice it. Now, the only difference I'll say is that, like, if you can manage to get some friends together, join a Swift, you might have a higher chance for Survivor, but Killer just doesn't have that option. So you just kind of have to keep kind of rolling the dice until you can manage to get it. And a lot of the time, it's literally just like learning the character, at least to be competent enough to be able to be consistent. And obviously, you kind of want to end up slugging for that 4K as well. So let's see. So yeah, I mean, I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on this. Like, is this something that you think should be added into the game? Do you think that this is something you should not be adding to the game? You know, what do you think? Obviously. Now, for me personally, I think it's fine where it's at. I mean, but I still wanted to at least bring this to your guys' attention, who might be, you know, might be interested in hearing a different kind of topic today that's a little bit off of the usual. And I think it's an interesting take to discuss, surprisingly. I never really heard anybody complain about the Adept to that extent, where they're like, yo, we gotta make this harder to get, which is crazy. But besides that, I mean, hey, fine, you know what I mean? I think it's fine where it's at. I think it's just, you know, it just goes to show inevitably Killers is going to be a lot more difficult than Survivor. You know, that's just how it works. It's just how it's been. It's just how it's going to be for the foreseeable future. So let me know your guys' thoughts. Consider, you know, hitting the like button, maybe subscribing for other content. And if you really want to support, you can go ahead and join the members on YouTube. You can either sub on Twitch or even join the Patreon. You have your name at the have your name right off at the end of every video. And I will see you guys in the next one. All right, let's go ahead and read off our members from Patreon. Pro King 101, YouTube members: Cargan Falcon, Evil Blade, Cap Courteous, WTF You're Not J-Lo, Evil Peach, Cozy Bozy, Theo Endire, Dole Whip, Noxus, Zero Mocker, Jack, Christian, and Crow Vader. And for the Twitch, we have Final Girl Bunny, Leona Art, Zazabu, Evil Blade, Danica, Crow Vader, Cake is a Road, Zeneron, Ginsburg, Mr. Morik, Kevin, Zero Mocker, Ashai Boo, and Gryffindor. Appreciate you guys supporting. Really means a lot. If you want to become a member, you can go ahead and join through Patreon or YouTube members, or even sub on Twitch. See you guys in the next one.